Hello everyone, today I'm going to be showing you how to make an alliance member list using the Politics and War GraphQL API and Google Apps Script. To successfully complete this tutorial, you should have some basic knowledge of JavaScript and or Google Apps Script. Let's get started. There are two components to this project. One is going to be designing our query using the GraphQL playground, and the second component is going to be actually writing the Google Apps Script to get information from the API and load it into our spreadsheet. The first thing that you need to do is go to politicsandwar.com, click on the account link in the sidebar, and scroll all the way down to the API key section. I'm on test.politicsandwar for the test server for demonstration purposes, but you'd probably want to do this on the regular server. Copy your API key here. Next, navigate to api.politicsandwar.com/graphql-playground. I'm on API-test just for the test server, but you would just want to be on api.politicsandwar.com. Next, append your API key to this URL here. Do this by typing $API_key equals our API key. You'll see that the error we had here will go away, meaning that we've successfully connected to the API. Next, we're going to figure out what query we want to run. So remember, we're going to get a list of all nations in our alliance and their ID, nation name, leader name, and score. So to do that, let's figure out what query to write. We can do that by clicking on Docs to open the documentation. You can see we have 4 different queries available. Let's use the nations query. You can see that the nations query takes in all of these parameters. I'm going to be passing in the alliance ID to limit the nation's return to the alliance ID passed. And you can see all of these fields here at the bottom are what are the information on the nation that we can return. So let's get started. In the query editor here, I'm going to type an open curly brace and a closing curly brace. Next, I'm going to type the name of our query, so nations. Now I'm going to do an opening parenthesis and a closing parenthesis. I'm going to type alliance ID, colon, space, an array, opening square bracket, closing square bracket, and then pass in the alliance ID. I could pass multiple alliance IDs if I wanted to by just appending a comma and then typing in all of our IDs, but I don't need to do that. I just want nations on this one ID for now. Next, I'm going to specify the fields I want returned. So I'm going to type opening curly brace, closing curly brace, enter, ID, nation name, leader name, and score, all on separate lines. Now I'm going to hit the play button. You can see we have all of the information that we want returned here, so it looks good. We'll come back to this in a minute. Now I'm going to go into our Google Sheet, make a new sheet if you haven't yet, and name this tab here members. Now to get into the App Script Editor, click Tools and hit Script Editor. We'll open a page that looks like this. Go ahead and name your project. I'm going to name mine Alliance Member List. And you can see in the body of this editor here we have a function called myFunction, and then an opening parenthesis and a closing parenthesis, and then an opening curly brace and a closing curly brace. This function keyword here denotes that this is a function. myFunction is our function name, and then we have the parentheses here representing our parameters, and there are no parameters for this function, which is why there's nothing in between these parentheses. So let's get started writing the body of our function. Let's give our function a more helpful name. I'm going to call this getMembers. The get, lowercase get, capital M on members here is just a JavaScript naming convention. Doesn't matter what you name your function. Let's start our function by defining a constant variable. So I'm going to do that by typing const space response equals. This is going to be our API response. So to call our API, we're going to use the URL fetch app class, which is available in all Google Apps scripts. More specifically, the fetch method on that class. And the fetch method takes in 2 parameters, a string with the URL of our API, and then an object containing all of the information that we want to pass into, that we want to send to the API server. So our URL here We're going to pass in this URL as a string. To define a string, we're going to have an opening quote, opening double quote, closing double quote, and then our URL in here. Next, remember params is an object, so I'm going to define a new object by doing an open curly brace and a closing curly brace. Get in here into our object. We're going to define a key value pair in our object called payload. And payload is going to be another object, so we're going to do an open curly brace and a closing curly brace here. Our payload object is going to have a key value pair called query, and query is going to be a string query of what we're going to send to our API. So to define a multi-line string, I'm going to have an opening backtick and a closing backtick, and I'm going to hit enter to give us some space here. And then inside of this query, I'm going to copy and paste the query that we wrote earlier. I'm going to format this here. Looks good. And now we should have our API response. Looks pretty good. Now I'm going to log our API response to the console. So I'm going to do that by invoking the logger class, logger.log, and then our response, and then call the get content text method on that response. You'll get a prompt to review permissions here for this app. So click that and follow the prompts. Awesome. If we wait for logs here, we should see that a JSON response from our API is logged to the console. And there we are. You can see that we have, in the JSON object, we have a data key, which contains another object with a nations key, and then inside of this nations here, we have an array of all of our nation objects. Remember, that's JSON, but we want to convert it into a JavaScript object. So we're going to invoke the parse method of our JSON class here. This is all just available in Google Apps Script, and pass in our response text. Sweet. And now to get our members, we're going to do parsed.data.nations, and that is going to contain the array of all of the nations that are members in our alliance. Now, when we are going to load this into the spreadsheet is not going to take our objects. So we need to convert our nation objects into an array, which is a row in the spreadsheet essentially. So we're going to be writing a transformation function up here to do that. I'm going to call this function parse member, and it's going to take in a member variable. And then we're going to return an array consisting of 4 elements. The first being our member.id, our member.nation name, and then our member.leader name, and then our score. Sweet. Now, since this parse.data.nations is an array of nation objects, we can invoke the .map method of that array and then pass it our transformation function, so parse member here. And then if we log the members to our console, we'll get a multi-dimensional array instead of an array containing nation objects. And there we are. This is a format that we can write to our spreadsheet. To actually do the writing to the spreadsheet part, let's get rid of the logger.log. Let's define a new variable called spreadsheet, and this is going to contain our spreadsheet. So to get our spreadsheet, we're going to do spreadsheet.app. This is the class that is provided in the app script. We're going to call the getActiveSpreadsheet method. Now we're going to get the individual member sheet. So to do that, we're going to invoke the getSheetByName method on our spreadsheet. and we're going to pass in members as that's what we named the sheet here. Next, we're going to get the range A2 through D, which is going to be this cell to this cell all the way down. We're going to clear the content of any, we're just going to go ahead and clear any data that may be existing. And this is clear content, not clear. The clear method will clear all conditional formatting, and I'm assuming that you will not want to do that. Next, we're going to get that range, get a slightly different range, A2 through D, but we're going to concatenate the last row that we want to get. So we'd want, if we had 8 members, if we had 9 members, we'd want to get A2 through D10. So to do that, we're going to put in, we're going to get access the length property on our members multidimensional array here. So members.length, and then add 1 to that because it's a header row. Next, we're going to set the values, and that's just our members variable, members multidimensional array there. The last thing that we're going to do is we're going to define a special function here called onOpen, noting the lowercase on, capital O for open here. And then this function is going to take in no parameters. We have to name it onOpen because it's a special function name that Google Apps Script will know to run every time we open our spreadsheet. And what we're going to do inside of this function is create a little menu to run our function easily. So to do that, we're going to use the spreadsheet.app class, call the getUI method, call the createMenu method on top of the getUI, what's returned when we run getUI. We're going to call this alliance functions. We're going to add an item to it. This add item method takes 2 parameters, the caption or our menu name here. I'll call this getMembers. And then the actual function name is a string, so getMembers here. And then we're going to add this to the UI by the addToUI method. And we're just chaining all of these methods together. So don't forget to save your app script. And if we close out of the app script here and refresh our sheet, you can see that we have an alliance functions button here. If we click that and then click get members, we may need to give our program additional permissions, so do that if you haven't yet. Then run the function again, and there you have it. We have all of our IDs, the nation name, leader name, and the score of all of our members in the alliance. So congratulations. You'd obviously probably want more fields, so to do that you would go in and edit your script and add more fields here. So you may want your continent or war policy or color or the number of cities for each nation, and you can build upon the script as you want. But that's it. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.